Okay, so sorry, I have kittens climbing on me in the back. So a little bit of context about this. This is actually a snippet of a much longer class that I had kind of put together that was working on argumentation and counter arguments. And this text, if you read it, this was picked actually because it was a part of an interview process, and they gave us this text and we had to design a lesson around it. So for the teach-a-thon, I decided I would just do the conversation, which would be kind of the opening of the class. And when I tested it out, this lasted for about 20 minutes. So what I'm going to do is ask that we go into breakout rooms, because I really want this to be a conversation. And I'm going to give you these questions that you can see on the screen here. And I would like you to talk about them in your breakout rooms and have one person kind of keep track of what you're saying so that you can bring it back to the whole group at the end. So I'll give you guys about 10-15 minutes. You will not get through all of the questions, I would say. So don't feel pressure to talk about everything that you see on the screen.
How many breakout rooms would you like, Jessica?
How many people are here?
We've got 9, and I don't know if everyone's back, so maybe I'll just open up 2. If they're too big, I can move some people.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm going to put everyone in the breakout room. Get excited. Here we go.
Okay. Anyway, I've put the questions in the group chat as well, so that everyone can see what it is. So did anyone have any kind of initial reactions about the article?
It kind of took me in a different direction than I thought. I really liked the beginning about how, you know, they had changed. They had kind of, I felt like they had given a little, and the new country had given a little, and that everybody had changed a little bit because of the experience of them being there. And I think that's really what happens with culture, right? Like when you have multiple, or people from multiple cultures coming to a new country, they make almost a new culture. You know, they don't erase the old one, but something new gets created. I think that's a really good thing, personally. Hello, Tina.
Yeah, I thought it was there's something, you know, just hearing the voice of somebody who's kind of living it, and then and just that word tolerance is still used so much. I know even in my team it was like, oh, we need to have something saying that we're tolerant, and I was like, oh no, like, so I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding. But yeah, that beginning part of that kind of, you know, there was a bit of exchange in what was going on with them, and the power of the personal story, you know, even in an academic environment, you know.
To me, the thing that stuck out really was the honorary whites, you know, this idea of it being, you know, even within the white would be the thing that you would aspire to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Tina, do you want to chime in at all? You're muted.
Tina, just go
Yeah,
up.
I can't see the article. I've still only got the teach-a-thon screen.
Okay, so if you go to up at the top, there's like a little arrow where it says view options. Do you see it? And if you don't see it, do you see the chat box?
Whoops, there's my dog. Sorry. She just got a...
Which options? Oh.
Yeah, the questions are in the chat as well, so yeah.
And I suppose it also highlights, you know, that first part when I kind of started reading it was the, you know, people having to always change their ways, the onus and the responsibility, you know, on them, whoever it is coming into a new community, whatever that community is.
Yeah.
and then to adapt to them fit in, and you know, that kind of the onus being on them.
I think that's really important as well, because it's not just moving to a country, but since we're all teaching English as well, even adapting universities requiring students to adapt to the university culture rather than the university culture adapting students. So, so has anyone studied abroad?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what were your experiences? So did you learn from being abroad, and did they learn from you while you were abroad?
Oh, I learned so much. Go ahead, Caroline.
No, I was going to say I learned so much personally about pretty much probably what I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
I'm not sure if people learn from me, but I'd like to think so.
Yeah, I learned that, you know, the that word of embracing, because I'm coming from a white privileged background, you know, and being very, very from an ethnocentric point of view of how politeness should be, for example, or how especially politeness, you know, that the rest of the world, many people in the world are rude because, you know, we do it in the correct way. So, you know, just kind of stripping that away and just saying, no, it's about embracing all different ways of being. And I was with a lot of people who really resisted that had continued to have an ethnocentric view about how things were. But that was me coming from, as I said, a white privileged background, that I could then look and, you know, and embrace those differences. So I could that kind of stayed with me then, always when I came back to my, you know, my home context, let's say.
For me, one of the things that has really stuck with me is this. Okay, so when I first started teaching, I was teaching in London, and I was teaching multicultural classes, multilingual, multicultural classes. And even though I myself was in a different cultural environment than the one I grew up in, it still was very similar. I mean, there are definitely differences between British and American culture, but they're very, very similar cultures also in many ways. So for me personally, that wasn't so much of an adjustment, although I did absolutely learn things a lot, both about my country and about British culture. But one of the beliefs I had at that time was that we're all basically the same. I do actually still believe that, that, you know, no matter what country you're from, people want to be loved, they want success at work, they care about their family, they want to do something meaningful. I believe all of that is true. But one of the things I didn't really realize until I went and lived in the Middle East, which is very different from Western culture, is the impact culture plays on your viewpoint of the world and how it should be organized and what is the proper behavior. And so I have now come to believe that, yeah, it is true that actually I believe more unites us than divides us. But what we learn as part of our culture is incredibly strong. It's really just embedded in every single thing we do, whether we realize it or not. I mean, I hesitate to, and I don't think this, you know, there are some things in life that are definitely wrong, like killing people, generally wrong. But there is so much gray in terms of what is really okay and what's not okay, because it's very hard to divorce things completely from the culture. And it's really easy to say like, oh, I would never do that, or that's wrong. But you didn't grow up in that culture, so you don't know how they're seeing it. It's just a very different thing. And I'll just say one more thing, because I feel like I'm on a tangent. Like one of the things that drove me crazy when I lived in Abu Dhabi at first was that wherever you went, whatever you asked your students, like, I'll see you tomorrow, if you study, you'll pass the test, they would answer, inshallah. inshallah. And it would just drive me crazy because I'm like, no, not inshallah, like study and you'll pass. But what I was missing was the role that religion plays in that society, that religion permeates every single thing you do. So yeah, inshallah, it was me who had the problem, not them. So anyway, I'll zip it.
I also think that the one thing that we often forget is because we are native speakers, we're automatically elevating ourselves above everybody else, you know, and especially, you know, I know that when I went to work, in particular, when I went to work in Africa, that this idea of like colonialism and colonialism in education was something that was shocking to me. Just the level of how like my entire life view had been formed from a place that in some ways is very hard to shake, especially like, I think, especially within the British education system, because anywhere you go, like even now in America, the amount of benefit I get from being British, that is unwarranted. You know, it's that sort of, we can't remove ourselves as easily as some people, you know, can from their culture, and we're expecting them to do that and to buy into ours without actually ever questioning ours.
Yeah. So we'll go to the next question, and it probably will be the last one. So Julie kind of touched on this in her initial reaction, but the statement that tolerance is not the same as acceptance. And so how far do you guys agree with that statement, and what does tolerance and acceptance really mean to you?
Tolerance is completely different from acceptance. Tolerance is a really negative word. You know, it's the idea that something is wrong, but you'll let it be, as opposed to, I still think acceptance is also a semi-negative word. Because to me, acceptance is also, I'm not sure that I agree with it, but okay. That's me.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the same. Tolerance is that kind of like, oh, okay, I'm just about able to tolerate this. And then you've got acceptance that's in the middle. And then for me, the one is like embrace, because that's kind of how I feel on a personal level, you know. I know I shouldn't feel lucky to have a basic human right of like family and friends and our partners, family and friends embracing us. I want them to embrace us. You know, I wouldn't want them to just accept, and obviously definitely wouldn't want them to tolerate. So yeah, I feel that's a kind of, it's a move on from tolerate, and then there is embrace. But people have said, you know, if you say embrace with people that maybe are not at that stage, you know, is tolerant a step forward to then get to acceptance to then embrace? Would embrace be a bit too much to, you know, I don't know. Some people have said that.
One of the things I've learned from working with the refugee community is like, because I agree with you, embrace is a wonderful word, is just hear. Like, you know, I hear you, as a way of showing this kind of idea of like a bridging point between, I guess, acceptance and embracing. The idea that you're hearing somebody on what they're trying to really say.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because also when I think about it, you just made me think, when you're saying embracing is like, well, oh, I'm, you know, it's like you're not a part, there's something there that's, you know, would we embrace people with who we're equal? It can be a bit patronizing as well, actually, that I embrace you as well, you know? So I like that kind of, you know, I hear you. That maybe feels a bit more equal as well in many ways, you know?
I think too, like this word tolerance is almost becoming, I mean, maybe not quite, but maybe a bit controversial. There's a lot of discussion about this word tolerance at the moment. So, for example, you know, here in the United States with everything that's happening because of Black Lives Matter and police brutality and all of these issues, there is the issue of tolerance. So what are we going to tolerate? Now, it's funny, I woke up thinking about this morning because there is this idea that you should be tolerant, but then you should be absolutely intolerant of intolerance. So then when someone says, well, it's my First Amendment right to say whatever I want, that's to me where some of that controversy comes in, because some of the things that people say are really hateful and violent. So is that free speech? Should we tolerate that, or should we be intolerant of that? So the question of what we tolerate, do we tolerate everything, or are we intolerant in some respects? I'll leave it there.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Anne.
Hi.
Hi, I just joined in. I'm sorry I missed the first part of this talk, but I love the discussion, and I wish I had a response or insights into your point, Melanie. I don't necessarily, but I for myself like to think of a couple of other words. One is celebrate. So instead of tolerating or accepting, celebrating diversity, and also leveraging. Leveraging meaning, as educators, figuring out how can I use this as part of the curriculum? How can I make this the focus of learning? How can this become what we do in the classroom? So just my 2 cents. Thank you.
That's great. I love it.
Yeah.
I think we need to check ourselves as well, you know, before we get too outraged by things. You know, sometimes we have to question why we're outraged by it. And, you know, I think, as Melanie was saying, in Abu Dhabi, and people saying inshallah, but, you know, I mean, perhaps we're the ones coming from the wrong side, and maybe we're being intolerant ourselves by, you know, sort of immediately jumping to something without questioning, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do I have more time?
I think you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to skip to the very end of it. And so Denzel in the article says, so do I have more time?
You've got 2 minutes. I think you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to add there, sorry.
Sorry.
So it says, Denzel says to make the shift requires less a change in policy or legislation as a change in attitude. So what do you guys think about that statement? Do you agree, disagree, in the middle?
I think the attitude shapes policy and legislation. You know, I mean, it's really, unless there is a shift in the attitude, then it doesn't reflect naturally. I mean, there's no doubt in the fact that where we are currently in the States has come from the attitude of those who are, you know, setting our laws, or setting what is acceptable. If you look at sort of like the issue with the police, it's institutionalized. So we can't expect to change policy without shifting in attitudes, and vice versa.
Sorry, I was just actually, Jessica, you've got about 5 minutes. I gave you the wrong time. So, but I actually wanted to jump on what Caroline said, because I kind of I agree. And I think we're actually seeing this right now, that the attitude change needs to come first. And that's, if you could even broaden this, where does change happen? Right now, we're seeing a lot of outside activism to push effective change. Is that the only place where that change happens? I would argue no. I think change has to happen both outside a system and within it, to really have those changes happen everywhere. So I kind of think that attitude change does need to come first before you're going to have a legislative change of any kind.
I think you need to apply it to people as well. You know, when we talk about the external and the internal, I mean, it's easy to stand up and go and protest something, but to actively make that change within yourself, you know, and to sort of research where you're coming from. You know, I know that I've always considered myself to be, you know, very liberal and on the right side of everything, but I've had to question a lot of the behavior I have. You know, and it's been very, very uncomfortable. And I think that's the personal side of this question as well. You know, I mean, it's that dual side of it.
Yeah, I think where policy or legislation comes in is for protection. So I think, and that maybe someone made me think about that at a talk and said, you know, sometimes the legislation has to come in to protect before attitudes are changed. And that was in terms of trans rights at a talk that I was at. And I was like, oh, wow, I hadn't, you know, thought about that in terms of legislation going ahead and protecting before attitudes, and whether that can influence then after as well. So that kind of be the only reason I would see that a legislation coming in would be for in terms of protection.
Great.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to add anything?
By the way, this would be, as it's for students, an amazing discussion and text. Yeah, Scotty's.
Agreed.
That's a good question. You know, because we've seen today a lot of talks on different ways to bring some of these ideas into the classroom and to be brave and use some of these topics that people are sometimes afraid to touch. So how do you introduce this? I'm assuming you just have the reading. How do you manage a talk like this with your students?
So, well, on personal experience, I think this text actually really challenged me as a teacher, because like I said at the beginning, this text wasn't something that I went out and found. It was something that the university that I was interviewing for sent to me and said, design a writing class around this text. And so as a teacher, you're now in that position of that university saying, you need to, you know, talk about this. How do you put it into a class? So as a teacher, I found it a little bit challenging to try and figure out ways for students to really bring in their own experience. And also, I didn't know the students that I would be teaching. I'd never met them before. And so trying to design questions that would kind of produce discussion, but that would work kind of for pretty much any sort of student that I ended up having in the class. But I do think it was nice to really kind of push me to be like, okay, these topics can be put into the classroom and quite easily. And I tested it with my friends, you know, from wide variety of background, and it was actually kind of, I had to stop the discussion because this was going to go on for ages, and I was like, we have to go to the writing part, sorry guys. Like, so, but it was the thread of the arguments kind of, even the last question was what they had to kind of write an argument for. So, you know, how far do you agree with this shift in policy? So it was really trying to elicit, you know, their views and whatnot, which is challenging linguistically as well. So, yeah.
That is great. Thank you so much, Jessica. Do you, we need to wrap you up. Do you have any?
That was great.
It was great. Yeah, I'd love to steal this
yeah.
actually. I think I might.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
I'm not sure, being put on the spot with that. No, I do think with everything going on, I think it is really important for us to kind of even look at these topics and reflect internally. Like you guys have been saying, that, you know, challenging yourself and kind of sitting with that uncomfortableness of looking at the world around us, but also looking at what we're doing and challenging our own everyday actions and words and impact. So,
awesome.
I really, really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Jessica.
Thank you. you.